a little bit of audio. How about this? Well, I fix my hair and make sure my hair looks pretty. I did shampoo and conditioner it. All right. What is up? I'm Elijah Campbell here from the early game on 107.5 The Game here on the Game TV on our YouTube page, giving you my coverage of the NCAA tournament, the Gamecocks road to the Final Four, brought to you by Griffin Pools and Spas. And we're finally here. We've been talking about the road to the Final Four the entire time. Well, now we have done it. We are now in the Final Four for the sixth straight season, which is a wild accomplishment. It's wild to think about being in the NCAA tournament, or not the Final Four, for 6 straight years. That is something that only the teams in the highest pantheon of the sport actually get to do. How did South Carolina get there? Well, that was by virtue of a 78-52 win over TCU. And look, I could write down a lot of things on this sheet right here and look at all the ways that this game was won, and there's so many different angles that you can get to. The fact of the matter is, though, TCU gave you a pretty good punch to begin the game. They got up 6-0, led by as much as 8 at one point in the first quarter. But the big difference is when TCU got up 14-6, South Carolina did not give up a point for the rest of the quarter. They go on a 10-0 run. They get up 16-14 going into the second quarter. If you want to compare that to the game against Texas in the SEC tournament, and the championship of the SEC tournament, Texas gets off to a good start where they score a couple baskets early. South Carolina, like they did last night, a little sloppy with the ball early on, had a certain stretch, maybe the first 4 or 5 possessions where you have more turnovers than field goal attempts. The vibe was a little bit similar. In that game against Texas, Texas was able to stretch out that lead to 14-0 before South Carolina even got on the scoreboard. You didn't let that happen last night. Lessons were learned from that game in Greenville, and lessons have to be learned in those scenarios in order to make it to the Final Four, get to your ultimate goal of winning a national championship, because you're at the point of the season where every team you play is here for a reason. You're going to have to be able to kill runs before they stretch into something insurmountable like it was in Greenville in the SEC tournament with Texas. So to get down 14-6, to go on a 10-0 run and be able to take a lead going into the second quarter was massive. And you knew TCU was going to give you their best shot too. Olivia Miles was averaging a triple-double in the NCAA tournament games and the 3 tournament games leading up into last night, and she didn't disappoint in the early going. She hit a couple of threes early. She had a couple of assists early. She was showing you why she is a projected top 3 pick in the WNBA draft. That's the type of player that you were dealing with Olivia Miles. And it's the reason that whenever the bracket was unveiled on Selection Sunday, I said that the one team that I really wouldn't want to see, the only team that I wouldn't want to see in that part of the bracket, was TCU, because of the ceiling, right? If TCU played their A game, they could beat you if you only played a C+ or a B game. But I think what eliminated that was that after that first quarter, and after South Carolina settled in, once they started getting some stops, once they started dominating the glass, it completely changed the trajectory of the game. And you went from playing a C game in the first few possessions to, over the course of 40 minutes, culminating in an A game. And I think what you saw, especially in the fourth quarter, that saw South Carolina turn an 8-point lead into a 20-plus point win, outscoring TCU 29-11 in that quarter, was the gear that this team gets into and how quickly they can shift from playing a C game to an A game. It's something that Preston Thorne and I talk about a lot on the early game, is that you can grade out your performance in games by giving a letter grade, and what can you get away with in certain games. And in this game, I thought you could maybe get away with playing your C+ game if TCU was playing on a B, right? But if TCU was playing on an A and you were at a C+, what you saw in that first 14-6 stretch that TCU held the lead in was what would have resulted in the entire game. But that's what championship teams do, is they're able to bounce back from those disappointing starts. And one of the reasons that you can look at and see how South Carolina was able to erase that deficit to the point where you get to the second quarter and you have the lead is the play of Raven Johnson. Now, Raven had 10 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists. She was doing the point goddess thing, right? Where she is in complete control of the offense. The team needs a bucket. You need to kill the run. She takes over. And you've seen her do that a lot of times this year. I think back at the Texas game, the second Texas game that was played at Colonial Life Arena back in January, and you get into a spot late in the game where you need a bucket, And not only do you need stops, you got to be able to have somebody give you that big time basket. And Raven Johnson did that on multiple occasions. She's constantly proven in her career that she can hit the big shot. And it's so funny to watch somebody who, for her career at South Carolina, is a 33.7% three-point shooter. But when her team really needs it, she turns into Steph Curry, right? That's exactly what happens. And it's seemingly whenever they need that bucket. And this year, she's shooting over 41% from three. It's remarkable to see the transition that she's had from being a liability as a shooter earlier in her career at South Carolina to being maybe one of the most reliable three-point shooters you have. And that is saying a lot because you have Tessa Johnson, who's fifth in the country at three-point percentage, right? You almost feel the same. If Raven Johnson catches the ball out on the wing and the team is down and they really need it, I expect that ball to go in every single time. And that's what Raven Johnson plays with, right? She plays with that swagger that allows her to be able to knock down those shots whenever things get really tough in games. And it's not just the shooting, too. The shooting obviously culminated in the 10 points she was able to get. But the play that she made that kind of woke me up to, oh, they're locked in and engaged now, was at one point in the first half, she gets to the basket, she misses the shot, TCU grabs the rebound. But instead of going back on the other end and just going to go play defense, she sticks around, gets the steal, right, which she is the master at doing. She is an absolute thief on the basketball court when it comes to picking people's pockets and getting steals, forcing turnovers. She forces the turnover, gets the ball, finds Tania Latson on a cross-court pass, and Tania Latson immediately upon catching that ball hits Joyce Edwards, who's diving to the rim, catches the ball, layup. It was a beautiful piece of basketball that showed how well this team can move the ball, how connected they are on the offensive side, and also how they're just so good at turning defense into offense. That's one of their many superpowers. I like to look at basketball teams all the time and say, what is your superpower? How do you win games? And what makes this team so good is that they can do it in a variety of different ways, but maybe their best superpower is the ability to maybe turn a negative into a positive. Raven Johnson missing a shot at the basket is a negative, but getting the steal and then immediately getting the hockey assist to create 2 more points within a stretch of 6 seconds turns it into a positive, right? You can even look at what this team did in terms of not performing up to par at making shots at the rim. They got 35 shots at the rim and they only made 15. And if you'd have told me that at the beginning of the game, I thought that was a stat that could spell trouble. But what that doesn't account for are the other parts of the game and the other ways that South Carolina can beat teams. And one of the reasons, again, why they're a number 1 seed, SEC regular season champion, and now playing in their 6th straight Final Four is because they will find other ways to beat you. They're getting stops on the other end, right? It wasn't like TCU was living at the basket. They made TCU settle for 13 mid-range jumpers, and TCU only hit 2 of them. After the Horned Frogs hit a few threes early on in the game, South Carolina did a significantly better job of running the shooters like Olivia Miles, like Marta Suarez, like Donovan Hunter off of the three-point line. They didn't allow catch and shoots. They made TCU have to put the ball on the deck, and that played into South Carolina's hands, played into their strengths defensively. That was a big turning point in this game. That's what was able to give them, a 6-point advantage at the end of the first half. That's what allowed them to be able to take an 8-point lead going into the fourth quarter. And then ultimately, when they turned it on and Olivia Miles had to go to the bench because of some cramping issues, that allowed them to make a somewhat close game into a no-doubter in the final minutes and help you truly introduce an element of garbage time in this game. That's what results in a 78-52 win. But I can't keep talking about this game without mentioning the production of Agat McKeer. I think I have tabbed her as March McKeer, right? And you look at the evolution of her throughout the season. True freshman having to play on a very talented team. It can probably be really hard when you first get to campus and you play in this program with this team and these players to find your role, right? To find out how you're going to be able to carve out minutes. Because there are a lot of games early on in the season, non-conference play, the early days of SEC play, where maybe she struggled to get onto the floor. And you saw, even at the end of the year, the last regular season game against Kentucky on the road, it was a tight game, and Dawn kept the starters out there for a lot of minutes. They all played over 30 minutes in that game. Agat McKeer only logged 5 minutes in that regular season finale at Kentucky, which, reminder, was a game that was played this month. I'm recording this on March 31st. That game was played at the very beginning of this month. This was not even a full month ago when Agat McKeer only got 5 minutes in a really tight game. And now what we've seen is 3 straight games in this NCAA tournament where I have left every single game thinking that Agat McKeer just played her best game in a Gamecock uniform. Her best one. Had a fantastic game against Southern Cal. Scored double figures off the bench against Oklahoma in the second round. And then last night scores a career-high 18 points. Oh, yeah. And she got 3 steals, too. You look at Agat McKeer and you see the length, right, which is clearly enough length to be able to bother her opponents. She gets a lot of deflections. She's able to pick the pockets of ball handlers and get steals and get out in transition. That's something she's done all season long. I think she came to South Carolina as a pretty good defender, has clearly grown as a defender, but what impressed me was her ability to not just make a catch and shoot 3 last night, but she scored a lot of those 18 points by putting the ball on the deck and getting to the basket, with a little more ferocity than maybe she did early on in this season. We've already seen that substantial growth from the beginning of the year to now. Like, we've known she could D up, but now she's able to give you 18 points in an Elite 8 game to get you to the Final Four. That's a game changer for them. It gives them a whole other weapon that whenever they play UConn in the Final Four, they're going to have to account for. Now, we'll do more UConn preview here in just a little bit when I wrap up, the dealings with the TCU game last night. But you can't tell the story of this Gamecock team getting to the Final Four this season without discussing the growth of Agat McKeer and how much that changes things for this team offensively. It also helps that Joyce Edwards had another game of 20-plus points. You knew that her bad shooting night against Oklahoma wouldn't hold her back. Only 8 points in that game, one of the few games all season long in which Joyce has scored in single digits. But she gets over 20 last night. She scores 24. She grabs 10-plus rebounds. She blocks 3 shots, made her impact all over the floor, and showed you what her ceiling can be as a player, too. We've seen that all season long, and that's one of the reasons why this team has been remarkable. To me, the last thing on this TCU game, is that if you look at the rebounding numbers, it was a total evisceration on the glass. And one thing that I might have had a mild concern with is that TCU is a solid rebounding team, and they have size to match up, right? They have a couple of players in the rotation that are 6'7", right? They have a couple of players in the rotation that can give you some comparable size. I look at someone like Kennedy Basham, who's a good shot blocker. She's 6'7". She comes off the bench and she's able to maybe adapt in different lineups that South Carolina can throw out there. But when you look at the overall rebounding totals, South Carolina 52, TCU 24. It wasn't remotely close. And then if you want to get more specific, South Carolina grabbed 22 offensive rebounds. And if you've listened to me on the early game or my video breakdowns throughout tournament runs when talking about any basketball team, whether it's the women's team, the men's basketball team, when I analyze basketball, I always value offensive rebounds a little more than defensive rebounds, because I feel like if you are able to consistently create second chances, you are going to increase your margin for error in any given game. You can survive bad shooting nights if you have them, if you are a great offensive rebounding team. And last night, South Carolina grabbed 61% of their missed shots. I'm going to say that one more time because you might not believe me if I said it. South Carolina grabbed 61% of their missed shots against TCU. And it helps that you're also having a really good shooting day, right? You were 6 of 9 from 3. That's 67%. You got to the free throw line a little bit, not a ton, but you increased your margin for error when it comes to the shots that you missed. You don't have to be perfect from the field. You don't even have to be great from the field. If you're grabbing those many offensive rebounds, you're going to give yourself a chance to have a highly efficient basketball game. And in a game where as a team you shot under 50%, it didn't matter because you grabbed so many boards on the offensive side of the ball and you were able to consistently put them back in for 2 and give yourself second, third chances consistently throughout the many possessions in a basketball game. That's what helps you turn a close game going into the fourth quarter into a blowout and introducing an element of garbage time in the fourth quarter. It was a dominant win from South Carolina, and coming up next for them is going to be big, bad, undefeated UConn. I'll share a little bit of my thoughts here with this game because I want to talk about it a lot on air on the early game from 6 to 9 every single morning that you can watch right here on this very YouTube channel. But my initial thoughts is that I feel better about South Carolina going into this game than I did going into the national championship game. The more I look back on it, because I did sit on the same YouTube channel and tell you I thought South Carolina could win that game last year against UConn, and that was me being optimistic. Because pretty early on, you noticed that UConn still had it. They're still able to get out and transition wherever they wanted. Paige Beckers was a woman on a mission, and that Sarah Strong and AZ Fudd were playing their best games, and that trio alone was able to do what they needed to win the national title. And offensively, the things that you saw that forced Carolina to sputter in the Sweet 16 against Maryland and in the Elite Eight against Duke, but they got away with because they played great defense and just got some timely buckets, kind of showed its eerie head in the national championship game last year. The final score ended up being 82-59. And I firmly believe that South Carolina is a better team at this point in the season this year than they were at this point in the season last year. I don't think you give up 82 points to UConn. I think you score more than 59 points against UConn. That alone would tell me, just by using some simple logic there, this is going to be a closer game. I don't know if I can fully say I think they win it, because UConn's undefeated for a reason. They're the defending national champions. This is the game that's going to have maybe the most eyeballs on it when it comes to the Final Four on Friday night. Like UCLA, Texas is going to be a great basketball game, and I think that's going to come down to the absolute wire. Texas is only favored by about 1.5 points in that game. It's essentially a pick'em. That's how close that game is. But one thing I've always found interesting is when there is a disconnect between sportsbook and analytics site, that usually that's ripe for unpredictability and maybe a little bit of variance. Because if you look at what the sports books opened up with in Vegas overnight, Connecticut opened up as a 6.5 point favorite. Now, I go on barttorvik.com, free plug there, Bart, you're welcome. A great analytics website where it is free and you can look at anything that you need to find. It's one of the greatest deep dives. Ken Palm does it for the men's side. Bart Torvik does it for men and women's. I highly recommend going on there to just learn more about the teams that are playing in this event every single year. But he does projections, analytical projections that oftentimes match sportsbooks. Sometimes sportsbooks will go to these websites to be able to get their thoughts and be able to get their gambling lines before the game. So that sometimes they mirror each other frequently. Very rarely do you see differences between what the sportsbook is going to look like and the spread that they have for the game, and what the projections are for a Bart Torvik or a Ken Palm. Bart Torvik has South Carolina winning this game by over 5 points. Technically 5.5 would be the line. If Bart Torvik's setting the line, they have South Carolina as the favorite. There's an interesting disconnect there. But I'll leave it with this before we go on through the week and we continue to analyze this matchup. South Carolina's better. I think they have more ways to beat you offensively than they did last year. They're playing in a better groove. Anybody on any given night can give you these hands on offense too. And with UConn, you look at AZ Fudd and Sarah Strong, and that's maybe the best 1-2 combo in this entire sport, and that's a big reason why the Huskies are undefeated and they're the favorite according to the sports books. And rightfully so. They have taken a buzzsaw to every single team they have played this year. Yes, the Big East is not very good at all in women's college basketball, but 38-0 is 38-0, and that's what that team is right now. And that's what makes it such a daunting game. But I think what South Carolina poses in terms of a threat to UConn is different than anybody they've seen this year, because we've seen on any given night Joyce Edwards go for 20+. You get that more oftentimes than you don't. Tania Latson in the Sweet 16 proved that she can still go for 28 if the game kind of flows in the way that requires her to take more shots. Remember, she was the leading scorer in the NCAA last year at Florida State with over 25 points per game. That player didn't just go anywhere. That player is still there and still exists pretty significantly. And we saw her have that version of herself against Oklahoma in the Sweet 16. You look all across the floor, too. Raven can go for 15 any given night while also dishing out 7 or 8 assists. You have Tessa Johnson, who in Baton Rouge, we saw her have Kim Mulkey put in an absolute blender, yelling in the huddle, begging, imploring, asking anybody who can guard Tessa. That Tessa Johnson's still there. She didn't score a lot in the game, but she did make all 3 of her 3-point attempts, and as a 45% three-point shooter, that's top 5 in the country. You can still catch these hands that way. And we just saw Got McKeer come off the bench and give you 18. There are more offensive weapons who have the capability of having these type of big scoring nights than I think existed on last year's team, which automatically tells me that the script that we see on Friday night in the Final Four against UConn and Phoenix is going to look a little bit different than it did in the national championship game this time last year in Tampa Bay. All of my coverage of this women's basketball team en route to the Final Four and beyond is brought to you by our friends over at Griffin Pools and Spas. They've been covering or sponsoring the coverage ever since the calendar flipped from February to March. They've been a great sponsor, and they want me to remind you, too, that their 50th anniversary sale still going on. $500 discount on above-ground pools, $950 savings on all spa purchases, and 12 months no interest financing on spas, above-ground pools, and liner replacements. Look, spring is definitely here. Before you know it, it's going to be unbearably hot outside. So making sure your pool is up to par is going to be a little higher on the priority list than it's been the last couple of months. No better place to look than Griffin Pools and Spas. I'm Elijah Campbell. I'll talk to you again on the early game tomorrow morning from 6 to 9 a.m. on this very YouTube channel. And I'll talk to you again once my plane arrives in Phoenix. Should be a fun one.